Excuse me, sir, are you a performative man?
No.
Yeah, what are you listening to?
Women talking.
Tampons should 100% be free.
Gentle reminder that the men who did me the most dirty in my life were all leftists, intersectional feminists.
Most performative male award goes to...
Imagine, you know,
they're always like, why does the internet hate the performative man? We hate the performative man because they lie to get into our pants.
You look gorgeous. Can you hold my matcha?
Sure.
I'm gonna get a shot of you on my dispo if that's okay.
Sure.
Look, Charlie and I are both performers. How is the show supposed to go on if I lost my right-hand man?
I would almost prefer the outright misogyny of right-wing men and the way that they handle women to the insidious nature of lecherous leftist men, because it's calculated.
You know how sometimes you come across a funny trend or meme online, but the more you keep seeing it and the longer you think about it, the darker it actually gets. No? No one? Just me? Well, okay. Yeah, you see, that's kind of what happened with the whole performative male thing for me. Like, at first it was all jokes. The tote bags, the matcha lattes, the sad boy who reads Sally Rooney memes. Just another excuse to collectively poke fun at men, and who would pass that up, right? But like I said, my mind is a dark place. So today we are digging underneath the humor of it all to figure out how this meme became so massive and why it hit such a nerve, especially with women. And when I tell you we are gonna be doing the absolute most in this video, unpacking the trend, defending performative males, yeah, if you can believe it, exposing hidden misogyny inside woke men, and yeah, also tying it all back to Charlie Kirk's. Told you, the places my mind goes sometimes. Anyways, let's just embark on this journey and we'll figure it out as we go. So no further ado, let's go. Okay, even though I'm sure many of you are already aware, let's still take a closer look at what performative male actually is. If you believe major media outlets like Cosmopolitan or the New York Times, he's basically a guy who pretends to like feminist literature, matcha and Clara songs just to get laid. Yeah, this is indeed the performative male starter pack. The claim is essentially that these men are dressing in more stylish or feminine ways and acting out a kind of sensitive, feminist adjacent persona in order to seduce women. The performative male is kind of an emotional catfisher. It's not that he genuinely likes indie musicals or literary books, it's that he's using them like props to get what he wants. Yeah, this whole thing apparently blew up because of a TikTok where a woman was telling the story of getting on an elevator only for the man inside to pull out a book and start reading. She mocked him, claiming that he was being performative because he only did it because she walked in. And also, who takes out a book to read on an elevator, right? Well, as an avid reader myself, I would, but that's just me. Yeah, so far I haven't been able to actually find this original TikTok. Maybe I will by the time this video goes up. But this is kind of what's credited as the start of the trend. Then the whole thing snowballed because other women started stitching this original creator, telling more stories of men suddenly becoming deep readers or feminist allies or Lana Del Rey fans the second a woman entered the room. And fast forward to today, we now have thousands of videos under the hashtag performative male, mostly of people dissecting and mocking the trope. People even started holding performative male competitions the way TikTok once did or still does with celebrity lookalike contests. There has even been a competition here in Budapest, which by the way I had no idea was happening and sadly missed. Yeah, I would have loved to witness that. But anyways, that still gives you an idea of how widespread and massive this trend has become. And I think the easiest thing to compare performative male discourse to is the whole pick-me girl or fake gamer girl. Yeah, who remembers that? Essentially in the 2010s, women who liked video games were accused of pretending to be into them for male validation. Surely girls couldn't possibly be interested in something that didn't align with traditional gender expectations like makeup or shopping. It must all be fake and done for male validation, right? In the same vein, the performative male discourse is kind of the gender flipped version of that. These men who like things coded as feminine get accused of only doing so to appeal to women. Because once again, reading romance novels or being interested in feminism aren't things a real man would ever naturally enjoy.
Hey son or thought daughter, boring. What about matcha drinking, tote bag holding, feminist book reading, Claro listening son? Or backstabbing, male validation seeking, I'm not like other girls saying daughter?
Anyways, before we get into the meat and bones of this video, I just want to set the stage. For me personally, this trend has two distinct layers. First, the aesthetics, so the memes and the jokes, and then something a little bit more serious underneath. So walk with me here because we are going to slowly peel back both of the layers. Okay, the first layer is pretty obvious and straightforward. The aesthetics part, the memes, the countless TikToks, the competitions, the mockery. It's the endless clowning on guys with mustaches, the ones who wear tote bags, quote Sally Rooney, or go to layaway concerts. Now, let me defend men here for a second before we start properly calling them out, and calling them out on the things they actually need to be called out, okay? In this section, I essentially want to discuss how this whole idea of calling one type of guy performative is actually a little absurd. Like, first of all, is it even possible to separate performance from identity in an age where everything is performative? Online for sure, but offline as well, more and more so every single day. When every cafe and every subway ride you take, every date you go to has the potential to end up on TikTok. Like, we're all aware that someone could be filming us at any given moment, and that awareness shapes how we act in our day-to-day lives. But it's not just the surveillance state of social media that makes this true. It's also about how our very identities are constructed, and how these days they've almost completely shifted from production to consumption. Back in the mid-20th century, a man's identity was largely rooted in his labor. He was a steel worker, a carpenter, a mechanic. His performance of masculinity came through work that was both tangible and visible. Building a house, repairing a car, producing something you could point to and say, I did that. This is the physical result of my labor and skill. Today though, young men are building spreadsheets instead and managing a brand's social media calendar. Bullshit jobs that are abstract, digitized, and stripped of meaning have become the norm, and our identity is no longer anchored in production, so they increasingly get anchored in consumption. And mind you, this isn't just true for men, this is of course true for everyone. Over the last years, there has been a lot of discussions around women performing and women crafting identities. I mean, even think about all the discourse around performative readers or coquettes or that girls. So the same logic applies here. The performative man builds his identity out of commodities. The loafers, the tote bags, the sad girl literary novel, the Labubu plushie. If you think about it, each commodity is a Lego brick in the construction of a personal brand. But the thing is, when the self itself becomes a brand, every single act of yours starts to look like a marketing strategy. So you cannot help but think he's not just reading feminist literature in a public space, he's signaling virtue to his target demographic. But you see, I don't think it necessarily happens on purpose or that most men are doing it as an evil, conscious plot. I think this is just the inevitable outcome of living in a world where return on investment logic seeps into everything. Our jobs, our dating lives, even our ethics. We are all performing, whether in real life or for the algorithm or even just in our own heads. Which brings us to the absolute hypocrisy of singling out this specific kind of performance. Anyone who's ever been interested in gender studies has probably come across a book called Gender Trouble by Judith Butler and has heard the line, gender is performative. What Judith Butler meant wasn't that gender is fake or just an act, but that there is no such thing as natural essence of man or woman. Gender exists only through repetitions of certain behaviors, gestures, and styles, and over time, those repetitions harden into what looks like truth. So the insight here is that there's no such thing as an authentic male. There are only different performances of masculinity. And when people call someone performative male, what they're really saying is, this performance isn't the one that I'm used to. The blue-collar dad who grills steaks on the weekend and the guy carrying wired headphones and a Tessa Mashfek book in his tote bag are both doing performances. They're just pulling from different scripts. One is socially naturalized, so it looks authentic, and the other is newer, less familiar, so it looks put on. And this exposes a double standard. Like, we don't call a guy in Carhartt or Timberlands performative, even though those clothes are also aesthetic signals of certain type of masculinity. You see, the critique only emerges when men adopt performances coded as feminine or soft. So if you think about it, what gets called performative isn't actually insincerity. It's deviation from traditional masculinity. But that raises the question, like, what do we then want from these men? That they go back to gym selfies and Jordan Peterson quotes? Ultimately, there's nothing really embarrassing about a man wanting to read bell hooks or drink matcha or listen to Lana Del Rey. And in their defense, maybe that's their way of escaping another kind of performance, the rigid macho script that they were handed at birth. Okay, now let's peel back the second layer of the strand, the side that actually often gets buried under endless memes and jokes and competitions and whatnot. And that is the real lived experiences of women who've dealt with these so-called performative males or fake woke men. Because if you pay attention, a lot of the women talking about performative men aren't just roasting their quirky fashion choices or the books they choose to read in public. They are describing ex-boyfriends, hookups, and failed dates, the men who loudly declared themselves feminists and sensitive artists, only to turn around to be manipulative, dismissive, or outright misogynistic once things got intimate. I've seen so many women say that the men who mistreated them the most weren't the obvious misogynists. No. They were the leftist men who shouted the loudest about social justice and feminism. Men who seemed outspoken and vulnerable in public, but who couldn't connect the dots between their politics and the way they actually treated the women they dated or slept with.
Gentle reminder that the men who did me the most dirty in my life were all leftists, intersectional feminists, people who love to work with women, people who surrounded themselves with women, because that was the staging so that if anything ever happened, which it did a lot with these people, if anything ever happened, they could run cover for each other and say, well, no, I only work with women. Well, no, my girlfriend, we have the best relationship. I would almost prefer the outright misogyny of right-wing men and the way that they handle women to the insidious nature of lecherous leftist men, because it's calculated. Right-wing men, I don't know if they're smart enough to be able to pull off the long con that leftist men do to get women, to abuse women. It is an impressive display of peacocking, of pretending to be a feminist only to do really heinous acts on the down low. And that is something that I have seen across entertainment industries. That is something that's super prevalent in politics. It's this idea, it's this smokescreen that's created that says, like, because I'm friends with women, because I respect women, it could never be me. So when allegations come out, and you have all of these smart women who are friends with these people being like, oh my God, I'm genuinely shocked by this. That's all staging. That's all on purpose so that it feels too ridiculous to believe.
And here's the thing. I think most of you would agree that betrayal always cuts deeper when it comes from someone who appeared to be on your side. Like, if a dude quoting Jordan Peterson treats you badly, well, no shit, Sherlock, you saw that coming from a mile away. But when the harm comes from a guy who looks and acts progressive, yeah, that just hits different. And that's what makes the whole performative male thing so infuriating to women. Because for them, it's not just that these men are putting on an act, and yeah, it's kind of cringy and embarrassing, you know, but ultimately harmless. No, it's the fact that the performance itself feels kind of predatory, like calculated vulnerability, listening just long enough, saying all the right things, only to turn around and exploit the intimacy they've been granted.
We hate the performative man because they lie to get into our pants. That's why. That's why we hate performative men. Women attracted to men, basically, do not like the performative man because they are often manipulating these, like, feminine items or like things or interests that are commonly associated with women, like reading for some reason. They feign these interests to get access to women or female-oriented spaces. Do we understand that part? The issue is sometimes it's hard to tell if a man genuinely likes the same things that you do, or if he's pretending to like those things so he can talk to you for longer, or so that he can pretend that you have something in common that you wouldn't have in common with another man. And so now he's better or not like other men or the nice guy because he likes the things that you like.
And again, I want to reiterate, I don't think that every single tote-carrying, matcha-drinking man does this on purpose, like goes out to prey on women and hurt them, you know? But even if they don't, and even if they are trying their best to escape toxic masculinity and traditional gender norms, they often still default to patriarchal behaviors. Because I think ultimately patriarchy is so baked into every single person on earth, yeah, not just men but everyone, that it often bleeds into even the most progressive relationships. And when that happens, again, the sense of betrayal is just so much sharper, and it leaves women suspicious of any bell hooks reading leftist guy. And that is what essentially creates the stereotype of performative male that women now try to steer away from. So now that we've looked at it that way, let's also mention that this trend isn't anything new, it's just the latest language for an old archetype. In the late 90s and early 2000s, that same guy would have been called the nice guy, the one who performed sensitivity not because he was actually empathetic, but because he thought it was a cheat code to women's attention. And once he got that attention, well, the facade quickly melted away. Go back further and women have been suspicious of so-called progressive men for decades. In the 60s and 70s, the civil rights movement, the anti-war protests, the new left, women kept running into the same contradiction. The men in those spaces were out there branding themselves as revolutionaries, fighting for justice, but inside the movement, women were still the ones making the coffee, typing the leaflets, doing the emotional labor that kept everything running. All while being told that their own issues with sexism didn't really matter and that it was essentially a distraction from the real fight against capitalism or imperialism. Eventually, women got fed up and split up to form their own movements. That's where groups like Red Stockings and New York Radical Women came in. That's literally where the phrase "the personal is political" was born, as a clapback to leftist men who could be radical in the streets but very patriarchal at home. Feminist Robin Morgan put it bluntly in her essay "Goodbye to All That." She called out the counterculture and the new left for reproducing the same male supremacy, sexual exploitation, and hypocrisy that they claim to oppose. Her point was crystal clear. Real revolutionary change couldn't come from male-dominated movements because those movements were just recycling patriarchy under a different name. And when you look at today's discourse on the performative male, the continuity of this issue is undeniable. Like, as silly as it sounds, today's performative man is just a descendant of the 1970s radical boyfriend.
Tampons should 100% be free.
You think I should wear this outfit tonight?
You should never let a man tell you what to wear.
Yes, the cultural style has changed, but the contradiction is still the same. Progressive politics gets performed on the surface, while underneath, the same patriarchal dynamics play out in relationships. So what we are really dealing with is a long history of women realizing that even the men who claim to be allies can be some of the most dangerous. Precisely because they've convinced everyone, including themselves, that they are on the right side and that they've already done all the necessary work. And isn't this the perfect segue into our next section? Let's take everything we've discussed so far and bring it down to a real life, maybe even slightly crazy example. We'll see what you guys say. But to me, the moment I saw the entire situation of Dean Withers' reaction to Charlie Kirk's unaliving, my mind immediately went to the topic of performative males and to the whole history of women being suspicious and being betrayed by so-called woke men, progressive men. And Dean, I found, is an interesting case study for this video. Okay, I just want to quickly say two things. First, I know the word unaliving can be annoying, but I will need to keep using it here and there to avoid being demonetized. These aren't my rules, they're the rules of social media platforms, so sorry about that. Secondly, I've had this video ready for a while now, but I decided to wait a little bit. I didn't want to be accused of using Charlie's, there it is, unaliving to drive engagement, and also I personally didn't want to feel bad for using someone's tragedy regardless of my personal opinion of them. Hopefully enough time has passed now for us to talk about this. with a calm mindset. Okay, for anyone who missed it, let me just provide some quick context. Dean Withers is a YouTube/TikTok debater known for branding himself as progressive and left-leaning. You've probably seen him debating Trump supporters, MAGA guys, he debated Charlie Kirk himself, and a lot of the clips of his debates have gone super viral. So essentially, Dean publicly broke down crying on live stream over the death of Charlie Kirk. And again, if you don't know who Charlie Kirk was, well, he was a far-right political activist and the founder of Turning Point USA, a conservative youth organization that spreads right-wing ideology on college campuses and online. The guy essentially built his brand on opposing abortion rights, LGBTQ+, gun regulation, and racial justice initiatives. He was very much against progressive movements because he considered them threats to American values. So given that context, you can probably already see why it was, well, at the very least surprising to see Dean literally bawling his eyes out over Kirk's. His audience immediately started calling him out, labeling him performative. Some tried to point out the obvious irony to Dean that Kirk just reaped the consequences of the gun culture he so aggressively defended, which, did they lie? Others admitted that they were relieved he was gone because he actively promoted hate speech and pushed for policies that harmed real people.
Charlie Kirk is a victim to gun violence. His kids are a victim to gun violence. His wife is now a victim to gun violence. His wife and children were in attendance, dude. Imagine, you know he had a wife and kids, right? It's like, this is crazy, man. There's no place for this, man. Come on, man.
And I'm not gonna lie, when I saw Dean's reaction, which was immediately after I got the news, I too went like, oh, like, why are you crying, man? And you know what? Let me just stop here and clear the air. Like, unfortunately for me, I did accidentally see the footage of Kirk getting shot. Was it disturbing? Yeah, kind of, but like, I've seen much worse in the past couple of years, even while kind of trying to avoid graphic content because I don't really handle it very well. And my immediate reaction was definitely shock and the irony, like how ironic that the guy who was so actively against any sort of gun regulation died by gun violence himself, like only in America. Now, did I feel sympathy? Not really. Like, I wasn't celebrating either, but honestly, I felt pretty indifferent. I definitely wasn't sad or incredibly frustrated that this happened. I think the situation itself is objectively tragic, yes, but so are dozens of other stories of gun violence that come out of the States every single day. And I'm not from America. I've never even heard a gunshot in my life, and honestly, I hope it stays that way. Like, that's how it should be, by the way. So I don't really understand this clinging to the right to bear arms in the first place. Like, it's a completely foreign concept to me, okay? What's most shocking to me is how even after situations like this one, people still refuse to rethink their stance around gun laws. Anyways, I'm rambling. Like, TLDR, I wasn't really sad for Kirk, okay? I wasn't dancing around the room either, but this was a man who was perfectly okay with other people, like literal children, dying in the US and abroad because of the exact policies he supported. So why should I mourn his, you know? And honestly, I think my reaction, like that kind of indifferent but maybe slightly relieved middle ground, is probably the most common one. Sure, as always, there are people on the extremes, like some crying over him and literally comparing him to Jesus, and others loudly celebrating his death. But for most people, I would argue it was more like a shrug, like maybe with a touch of irony or relief, you know? And even though I thought Dean crying so intensely over Kirk was weird, well, I'm not here to police people's feelings, right? He's free to react however he reacts. Plus, I do get that part of his response came from the fact that Dean and Kirk were kind of peers. Even if they were on opposite sides, they were both publicly political, both part of the same ecosystem. I mean, Dean debated Kirk face to face. He sat across from him in the same room. So I can understand how that makes the situation feel more immediate and shocking and emotionally complex. Things like this probably force you to confront your own mortality in some ways, and that fear, I think, is the normal human emotion and reaction. So me personally, I wouldn't have had an issue with Dean if it stopped at him crying, but the problem is he then went online condemning women, queer folks, and people of color who were indifferent or relieved that Kirk was dead. The very same people, mind you, who were most harmed and affected by Kirk's rhetoric.
And honestly, if you answered yes to any of those questions, there's a very clear line drawn between me and you. I don't want your support, and I don't support you either.
And he was telling them off, positioning himself above them, saying he was somehow better because he felt sad and had empathy for Kirk and his family. And at that point, I was like, no man, I cannot give you the benefit of the doubt anymore. And I think a lot of people felt the same way, especially his own supporters who were really disappointed in this kind of behavior. Because it's truly wild how he always talks about being progressive and debates people so fiercely, but when it came down to it, he really didn't even seem to grasp how his comments were so full of privilege.
And you know, Dean, it really pains me to be the one to bust your fucking bubble, but you've never cried for children that have died of genocide. You've never cried for children that have died in school shootings. You've never cried for people that were gunned down innocently by the hands of crooked police officers. So that's crazy. You can cry for a man that pushed that amount of hate, but you're supposed to be progressive. Funny, but not funny, haha.
And I think it's because at the end of the day, Din is still a man. I know. 'Cause you're just a man. It's just what you do. A man who could afford to treat Kirk's life as tragic, as worthy of mourning, because Kirk's politics never actually threatened him. I hate to go there, but let's be honest, as a straight white man, he will never feel the consequences of Kirk's war against abortion rights, or queer rights, or his open racism.
Dean is like astronomically privileged, right? And there is not an active law against Dean right now, right? Because he's a white man. So there's not a single law against his body and what he can do with his reproductive organ, right? But there is about ours. And Charlie Kirk was very vocal about what women should do with their bodies, what little girls should do with their bodies if they so happen to be assaulted.
While for Dean, Kirk might have been just a political opponent, and this whole thing might have been a game and a paycheck, for many people, Kirk was someone whose rhetoric actively translated into daily harm.
I need you all to realize that debate will never save us, and the reason you have all of these left debate bros crying over Charlie Kirk dying is because they were actually buddy-buddy and everything was actually just a game to them. This demonic rhetoric that actually causes harm to people of color, to minorities, to actual people, real genuine violence and harm that is enacted through rhetoric that these people would create and spew all over the world. And then the left guys would come in and believe that they're saving the world, doing justice, but in reality, it was all just a fucking game to them. That's why they're crying, because he's gone. Because it was all a fucking game. Debate was never about actually understanding and convincing people. It was about clip farming, making money, and getting famous on the fucking internet.
Don't celebrate what happened to Charlie Kirk. Charlie made me rich. No one knew who I was until I debated Charlie Kirk. Okay? Yes, he said hateful things, but he's allowed to because those are his political platforms. He's allowed to have different opinions because hate is a political platform right now. Look, Charlie and I are both performers. How is a show supposed to go on if I lost my right-hand man? Anyone who's not crying for Charlie right now is a monster.
Hey, Dean, why don't you cry for all those kids that suffer the same fate from gun violence as Charlie? Literally, another one happened at the same time in Colorado. I don't see tears for them.
Because those kids don't make me money. How can I get fortune and fame off of a fourth grader? I can't debate these Make-A-Wish kids, okay?
Let me speak for myself here. Like, you do see how I look, right? Like, also, I'm a woman living outside of the US, like as far removed from the situation as you could possibly get. But I still believe like words matter. And when someone like Kirk pushes a certain idea in the States, it crosses the ocean, like it sure does. And we've seen that happen time and time again. It ignites certain types of people, certain types of men who then carry that ideology into their own communities. And that affects women and minorities everywhere, not just in America. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, this is why I think that Dean's reaction to Charlie Kirk's death illustrates why so many women are wary of performative men. To be fair, this also of course shows why POC and queer communities are wary of straight white people in general, because they will never understand the struggle. But for the sake of this video, we're focusing on the harm performative men do to women, whether consciously or unconsciously. On the surface, he performs allyship, he brands himself as progressive, as sensitive, as on the right side. Much like the performative male who reads feminist theory in public, Dean cultivates this passionate image of care and solidarity. But when it comes down to it, the mask slips, the facade crumbles. I mean, we have seen how Dean's sympathy defaulted to Kirk, a white conservative man who actively spread harm toward women and minorities. And to me, that kind of revealed where his deepest identification still lies. Not with the marginalized, but with someone who looks just like him. And that's the conditioning baked into our culture as well. White male suffering is framed as tragic and heroic and deeply human, while the suffering of the rest is reduced to numbers, statistics, or politics. And even the most progressive, sensitive men unconsciously fall back into centering white male humanity as the most deserving of compassion, the most deserving of tears. And for women, it only rings familiar. It mirrors the experience of dating the woke guy who casually quotes all about love, only to find that in private, he still expects emotional labor and dismisses misogyny as secondary. That's it. I rest my case. I feel like Dean is like the political version of the performative male. The thing about performance though is that it can disappear in an instant the moment real stakes show up, which is pretty much what happened here. I don't know, let me know what you think. This is just my perception of the situation. I certainly don't claim to be the most well-versed in American politics or anything. And surely Dean is not the only one who came out of the woodwork to condemn and tell off people celebrating Kirk's death. The number of people I unsubscribed from, even here on YouTube, man, don't even get me started. Anyways, like I said, let's not even go there. Let me know what you think about this specific situation, okay? Final thoughts. Even though performative male trends started from genuine critique and concern, I think the whole thing has now sadly turned into aesthetics being punished more severely than actual misogyny. If you notice, real discussions of women's experiences and how men mistreat them never become as big or as viral as the memes and performative male competitions. And certainly other men don't chime in as much either. And I think this really illustrates that as a society, we can easily turn a blind eye to men harming women, but we can never turn a blind eye to men stepping away from traditional masculinity. Essentially, any deviation from patriarchal norms gets punished the hardest. A man who cheats, gaslights, or mistreats his partner rarely becomes a meme or a collective talking point, especially for such a long time. But a man who reads normal people in public or gushes about Lana Del Rey, well, he's instantly laughable. Society can tolerate men exploiting women behind closed doors, but it cannot tolerate men openly breaking the codes of masculinity. And even if he's only pretending to care about feminism, the very act of seeking validation from women instead of men shifts the hierarchy, and for that, performative male gets mocked, policed, and turned into a punchline. What's even more ironic is that women themselves are often the ones driving this discourse. Like the book community, for example, which is predominantly female, has been one of the loudest spaces critiquing the performative male. And it's no coincidence that many of the most popular genres in those spaces, like romanticy, for example, constantly reinforce traditional gender roles. The heroes of those books are usually the same archetype, the brooding, morally gray, possessive man. So when a real-life man enters those spaces with a different kind of masculinity, he doesn't necessarily fit the fantasy. Instead, he clashes with the tropes baked into those books, and because of that, he gets judged and accused of pretending. As you can see, even female-dominated cultural spaces can end up reproducing the same patriarchal ideas ideas that they claim to resist. Another thing I wanted to mention, if the performative male discourse stays only at the level of memes, it risks trivializing feminism altogether. It risks reducing it to a joke, or worse, turning it into just another tool men can use to gain attention or sexual access.
We want these men to be reading these books. We really do. So you can't just call any man who reads a feminist literature book performative, just feeding into the stereotype that men can't consume content written by women and for women. Calling any man who reads feminist literature performative is just feeding into the patriarchal stereotype that men cannot consume intellectual content about women. You're discouraging men from reading these books. To me, it almost feels like people are saying that anybody who consumes feminist literature isn't a real man, is a performative man. Criticizing any man who reads feminist literature is not productive. It's not.
Plus, now men who genuinely want to engage with feminist ideas risk not being taken seriously by women and by other men and get written off as performative. And now that they're aware of how they're being perceived, I wonder if they start performing to avoid looking like a performative male, which would just end up being this unproductive, vicious cycle.
Guys, it's not performative if you're actually doing it. You know, like if you're only reading your feminist literature in public in front of women, yeah, that's performative. But if you also read it at home and you really internalize the message and try to become a better feminist every day, and then you also go to a coffee shop sometimes and that happens to be the book you're working on, that's not performative. It's just reading.
Not to mention that there are now a whole separate category of men making fun of performative men, trying to mock them because they think it will earn them points with women or something, and it's all just become very absurd.
Sorry, no, I was just getting lost in my book. I don't know if you saw me reading. I couldn't hear what you said. What'd you say?
Anyways, let me know what you think. I know this video has been very, very chaotic, but thank you for watching. And if you enjoyed it, please also drop a like and make sure to subscribe. And yeah, stay safe. I'll see you in my next one.